Hopkins, Vice President of the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education, and we welcome you to this 10th Annual Media Symposium. It's hard to believe that we've been doing this for 10 years now, but we hope that it's been a good program for all of you reporters who are here. Who do we have here for the first time today? We do have a few new faces. Well, we will give you the whole lowdown on what to expect throughout the program, but we hope that this is going to provide a great start for you for 2016 and giving you some really meaty information on the education issues that you can report on throughout the year. And we hope that you'll certainly use the Georgia Partnership as a resource. We have been extremely pleased to locate this program here at Georgia Public Broadcasting for the last 10 years. They've been great hosts, and we are just pleased as can be to be with them again today. I would like to introduce Taya Ryan with Georgia Public Broadcasting, President and CEO of Georgia Public Broadcasting, who's going to provide an official welcome to you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Hello, welcome. I could not be happier to have this group in our house. The Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education, I've known Steve Dollinger almost from the moment I took the position at GPB about 6 years ago, and have been following this group, and it's been very impressive and as helpful to us as it is to you as reporters to understand where we're going in education. The reason why it's so important that you're here is that we share their interest in the education of students in Georgia. You know, I would be remiss just to say welcome to GPB and not talk for 2 minutes about what we do here for education, just in case you don't know. I just was speaking to the Teacher of the Year here. I don't see, where did he go? He's not, there he is, Ernie. And he knew about this, but I want to make sure you know about this. We have about 120,000 somewhere. You all could correct me on this. But K through 12 teachers in Georgia. And I want to tell you that last year, we don't have this year's numbers, but last year, 85,000 of them interacted with GPB on our education site to download material for use in their classrooms almost 5.5 million times. It is a massive relationship that we have with teachers in this state, and I dare say a trusted one, and we take it very seriously. We have 3 educators who do nothing but travel the state, and in our case, help teachers understand how to use digital material in their classrooms, because that's essentially what we do. We are not educators. We are facilitators of educational material. We took a big leap a couple of years ago, and if you haven't seen it, I'd love to show it to you, and there'll be some folks roaming around today that just let me know if you want to see it. A couple of years ago, well actually 4 years ago, we took the leap and we bought the 8th grade Georgia history textbook. We bought the rights to it. The big old thick book that the Carl Vinson Institute really couldn't afford to publish anymore. It's very hard to publish just locally versus on a national basis. We turned it into a digital textbook. And I don't just mean something that you read on a digital device. I'm talking about a truly interactive platform where a student interacts. It's fun to use, it's beautiful looking. We've had enormous interest. We have lots of pickup this year. We're happy to show you how the digital textbook works because frankly, it's one of the first ones. And if Apple tells you they know how to do textbooks, I'm here to tell you I challenge that. Because we tried to put this on an Apple platform 4 years ago and it crushed. It was like a foundation. It crushed under the weight. And so our team at GPB literally wrote this on an Adobe platform from the ground up, and we're the first ones to do that. So we're really proud. I hope you as Georgians are really proud that you have a team that knows how to do this. We're in the 2nd iteration of the textbook, and that means what we're going to do is gamify many things within the textbook, and that's a very exciting proposition, I think, for teachers and students. And there is a very interesting element that we created and discovered, and Adobe's now using in their platform for all publishing, which is that how many have an iPad, for example? If you have an iPad, you read it a lot. I should have brought mine. You read it a lot in the landscape mode, and that's how students have to read the book. But there's always got to have a teacher's edition, right? Well, the teacher's edition, you just turn the iPad for vertical, and the teacher material comes up, and it's not something the student can see. So we've thought about a lot of things with regard to digital education at this company. We're going back to the old-fashioned a little bit this year because we're doing a 100-part series, video series on physics and chemistry, 2 separate courses for high school that will be available to every school system, every educator in the state for free. So that means in many parts of our state where we can't afford physics or chemistry teachers, I would hesitate to say the coach could teach physics off of these, but we can get darn close. And I can tell you, I've sat through every one of these hours of programming, and it has been, it's hurt my head. But I think they've done a fantastic job. The producers have done a really superb job. And I will tell you, our discussion yesterday was, oh my goodness, we've already shot all the periodic table video. Now what do we do? Because there's 4 new elements. And we will have those 4 new elements when we launch the chemistry series in August, really. And that's the beauty of digital education, is that it is very free and open. So now that I've given you the pitch of what's available here, because I want those educators, I want you as reporters to understand that GPB is a lot more than, say, Downton Abbey. We really are in the education business, although we are Downton Abbey, at least for 8 more weeks, please. Anyway, thank you so much for coming. You have a very exciting day. I'm going to pop in and out, and I've got a number of our folks here who will be joining, because we need to learn from this wonderful organization also, and we lean on you tremendously. So thank you so much. Thank you for letting me do that.
Thank you so much. So many great resources here in the state of Georgia, with Georgia Public Broadcasting being one of those outstanding resources for educators. Well, we're going to get into the housekeeping very quickly, and I'm going to sail through that. You picked up your packets when you came in, and also, I hope, got a copy of the 2016 Top 10 Issues to Watch. Great publication. We'll be releasing it. You are the first to see it. We'll be releasing it statewide after this symposium. We'll go to all of our legislators, our other education stakeholders, but wonderful material, especially as you're doing your stories on education issues. Packet of information I hope you also picked up. You'll find the agenda in front. I think most of you know what to expect today, but we will start with a presentation on those 2016 Top 10 Issues. We'll hear from Tomeka Hart with the Southern Education Foundation on equity in education. We'll then move into a break, and then we'll follow that with hearing from Dr. Chuck Knapp on the Governor's Education Reform Commission, and then also hear from our State Superintendent of Schools. We'll move then into lunch, and we'll do, you'll have some time to do some networking, sort of stand up, stretch, hopefully get some good food also. And then we'll hear from the Department of Education and from Ernie Lee, our Teacher of the Year. Following that will be our afternoon session, and we'll hear first from Mike Petrelli with the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. He's been one of our most popular speakers in the past, so we are delighted to have him join the partnership for this media symposium. And following that, we'll move into our panel discussion, and you'll see the list of all the participants for that. So we'll follow that with the biographical sketches on each of our speakers. I'm not going to go into a lengthy introduction of any of the speakers. You can read that at your leisure. There is a press release related to the top 10 issues that Bill will cover shortly. And the yellow sheet, our evaluation form, please, please, please take time throughout the morning to fill this out and leave a completed copy at the end of the day. It really does help us as we plan this program. We pay attention to your recommendations, so please take the time with it. And then the last sheet is how to connect with the Georgia Partnership. Out in the registration table, there are some resource materials, several from the partnership. We have our most recent report on REACHES, an initiative that we did with 2 school systems, Tatnall County and Calhoun City, working specifically with trying to make sure that their Hispanic students completed high school successfully. So you might be interested in picking up a copy of that, and also publications from several of our partner organizations. Today, we did not provide copies of the slides. Several of our speakers will use PowerPoint presentations. If you would like a copy afterwards, just come up to any one of us, Bill, me, Dana, and we'll make sure that we get a copy to you, electronic copy to you. Throughout the morning, I hope that you will ask questions. This program is for you, so we've allowed plenty of time for the presentations, but plenty of time also for you to get your questions answered. And don't feel badly about raising your hand and interrupting. I want to point out our staff members. I think you've met just about everybody as you came in the door with Alice Ford, Dana over here, who will be presenting shortly. Bill, of course, you know. Steve Dollinger, our president, who you will hear from a little bit later as well. And then me. We are a small group, to say the least. I also want to introduce, in the audience, we have our current chair, president and CEO of Gas South, Kevin Greiner, there in the back. Kevin has provided just outstanding leadership to the partnership this year, and he'll be our chair going into 2016 as well. And he certainly has been in tune with the education policy issues, especially as they relate to workforce development. So it's been a pure pleasure working with Kevin. If you need a good business voice, his is it, so grab him for that. At this time, I would like to call upon Bill Maddox, our communications director, and really the thought leader behind this program, who will make a few comments to you as well.
Thank you, Diane. Good morning, everybody. I hope I've greeted everybody as you've come in. This is the 10th anniversary, and to me, that's really amazing. When we started this 10 years ago, we didn't know where it was going, whether that would be the first and last. But as you look around the room, this is validation that we're doing something that's good for you. We had probably almost 45 reporters signed up for this by Monday. Many of you know it's been a crazy news week, and many of them have gone to different stories and covering for other people and that kind of thing. So we've lost several. But just looking around the room, this is validation we're doing something really good. We try very hard to put a program together that's good for you every year. The way we do that, as many of you know, I send you a note in November or so and say, hey, what do you want to hear? Who do you want to hear from? So we try as best we can to match up with that. Can't do it every time, but we do it as much as we can. As we start, I want to just point out a few people to you. You know who's here. I may not be presenting, but they represent organizations that you may want to talk to them. You may want to start a relationship if you don't already, and you can talk to them during the year. First person I want to point out is going to be speaking later. And that, as Diane has mentioned, Mr. Mike Petrilli, back here in the back. Mike is president of the Thomas Fordham Institute. He will, once he presents and we have the panel, he will not be able to stick around. He's got a flight he's got to catch immediately. So if you want to talk to Mike during the day, make a point to see him. Another person is Mr. Ernie Lee. Ernie is Georgia's 2016 Teacher of the Year. He will be presenting also. A lot of you know Ernie, but I wanted to point him out in case some of you want to grab him during the morning program. A few other people really quick that I want to point out. We'll do this alphabetically. Autumn Blanchard, back here in the back. Autumn is Director of Marketing Communications for the Southern Education Foundation. Tim Carroll. Tim kind of brings a business perspective with him as the Director of Education Policy from the Metropolitan Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. Robert Gaines, where's Robert? Robert is Communications and Development Manager for the Georgia Leadership Institute for School Improvement. If you don't know about GLISSE, you need to talk to Robert. Reg Griffin, I think a lot of people know good old Reg over here on the side. Reg is the Chief Communications Officer for right from the start. Department of Early Care and Learning. John McGosh is back there. John, Deputy Communications Director for Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. Many of you talk to them on a regular basis. Cindy Morley, where are you, Cindy? Cindy back here in the back, Director of Outreach for Communities and Schools. And Justin Pauley. Justin is Director of Communications, Georgia School Boards Association. And Allison Tyre, wrapping up here, is Executive Director, Office of Communications for the Technical College System of Georgia. So glad to have all those folks and really spend some time with them today. You will see on your table we're using hashtag Top 10 2016. I encourage you to share your thoughts and comments on that so everybody can take a look. Everything's on the record, unless somebody says, I'd like to go off the record on that, and you guys all agree. So everything you hear is on the record, so don't worry about that. If you have questions that you can't get answered during the presentation, we ask you after that's over, just move out in the hall, just ask to speak with them for a few minutes, and they'll be glad to do that for you. It is being videotaped over here. We'll probably have it available midweek or so. That's Nellie Ray and Brian Ray there. They do all our video work and fantastic. So that'll be available, and I'll drop you a note when it is in case you want to go back over some of the comments. Diane mentioned there is a press release in your packet about the top 10. This is such a great resource. We want to get this information out to people so they know it's available. So if you can help us spread the word, please do that. And maybe the press release will help you a little bit. That brings us to the top 10, and we're going to get rolling here with our first speaker. Not much I can say about Dr. Dana Rickman. You've got her bio in the, what did I say?
Nothing. You keep going.
Just keep going, you'll tell me later. There's a lot you can say about Dr. Dana Rickman. She's a colleague, a friend, she's great. Many of you have talked to her over the course of the years. This is her 6th top 10, I think she's written. We weren't sure of that, kind of hard to figure out. But it just gets better and better and better. So with that, Dana, come on and get us rolling.
Good morning. Welcome. I'm really excited to be here this morning. This is it's a labor of love for me that has sort of dominated my life over the past, 2 or 3 months. And so I feel like I'm sending my kid off to college. It's just sort of just putting it out there and saying, good luck, Godspeed, hope it goes well. So here we are with the top 10 issues to watch in 2016. And so before I get into them really specifically, as a lot of you know, most of you I think have been with us for a while and know about our top 10, but in case we have some new faces here, it really is a signature product that we've done. This is our 10th annual media symposium, but this is the 12th edition of the top 10. And what we do is we really try to look at, when we put the top 10 together, we really want to provide you all and the education community in general with some good, nonpartisan, research-based information about what we feel are going to be the big issues in Georgia. And so we work on it throughout the year. We don't start writing it till the end of the year because, as you as reporters know, things change quickly. And what I write in October is no longer true when this goes to press in mid-December. But we really try to look at, clearly there are more than 10 issues going on across the state in education, but we feel that these are 10 that could really impact student learning, from early learning all the way through higher ed. These are not presented in any particular order. It's not like number 1 is the top and 10 is ish. But I like to think that they're all equally important. But as you will notice when we go through these, they're all also very interrelated. These are not discrete 10 issues. It's actually very difficult to put together because they are so interrelated, and it's kind of hard to tell where one ends and where the other, as they all sort of build upon each other. And you'll notice that as we go through. And so without further ado, You know, I used to love this slide, and I set it up that I would reveal them one by one, and everyone would go, ah, no, oh, she said that, and then I realized you guys are looking at it, so you already know what the 10 are. So just humor me and pretend like this is a big reveal. So our first issue, success for all, what to do with chronically failing schools. There's a lot of talk now, we heard in the last legislative session, and will be coming up this year. We do have some what is termed chronically failing schools in Georgia, schools that just can't get their achievement levels up, and the state and districts have been doing a lot to turn these schools around. We have now conversations about a potential opportunity school district, and so this issue really looks at how do all of these things interplay together, and what should we be thinking about moving forward with turning around schools. The second issue is assessments. What is their rightful place? The point of this issue is to really take a step back and really try to understand what is the purpose of assessments. There is good reason to have high quality assessments in schools as a tool for teaching and learning. There is concern that we've really gotten away from that as a state and as a nation, that we've gone too far and we're using assessments for other purposes, accountability, holding teachers accountable, and that's become more about adults than the students. And so what does this conversation look like about what's the right use of assessments, how many are too many, what's really going on in the schools, and how do we as a state want to address this and move forward. Georgia Teaching Pipeline, protecting our future. There has been a lot of discussion about raising the quality of teaching in the classroom. Everybody knows that really the number one thing to get good student achievement is a high quality teacher in every classroom. How do we do that? And that comes down to teacher training, teacher development. So we're looking at, as a state, we've been trying to increase the standards and the rigor of our teacher training programs and try to really attract the best and brightest into those teaching programs. But at the same time, we've seen a decline in the number of teachers that are in the classroom and the number of students electing to go into teaching. So as state policy considerations, how do we balance that, raising the rigor, making it harder, producing the best and brightest, while still addressing a growing teacher shortage? How do we make that balance? Student funding, a more equitable pie. For those of you that have been following the Education Reform Commission, you know that there's a recommendation about changing how we fund Georgia schools. You'll hear a lot of discussion today throughout the day about this proposal and what it might mean. This issue kind of looks into that. The fifth issue, mind the gaps. Equity and outcomes in education. There are a lot of gaps. When we first started looking at this issue, I was trying to figure out how to frame it, and we have income gaps, we have achievement gaps, we have health gaps, we have expectation gaps, we have mobility gaps. There are a lot of freaking gaps out there. How do we mind them? How do we even start to even think about them? Well, the state of Georgia has put together an equity report, and the first thing that they're really wanting to look at is how do we get high quality teachers and leaders equitably placed across the districts and across the state. And so we're really looking at what's Georgia doing in terms of equity and providing those teachers in the schools. Early learning, an economic foundation for Georgia. Early learning is one of my favorite topics. I have a special place in my heart for it, and I think it's just because the kids are so darn cute and they haven't got all sassy on you yet. And we do write about early learning a lot, and traditionally we talk about, I think what you all have all heard and written about, the traditional argument of why early learning is important, about the benefits to the students, the long-term impacts on the state as the student age, and you hear, the 1 to 17, 1 to 12 return on investments, those kinds of arguments, and those are all still true and relevant. What this issue actually looks at is a little bit different take, economic foundation for Georgia. Earlier this year, right from the start, the Department of Early Care and Learning released a study about the economic impact of the industry of early learning, really looking at the industry's impact on Georgia's economic functioning. And what they found was pretty astonishing, that annually the industry of early learning generates $4.7 billion of economic activity in the state. That's billion with the B, as in boy. Lots and lots of money. And that really puts this industry on par with things like pharmaceutical manufacturing, hotel, motel. And so when we're thinking about economic engines of the state, early learning should be right up there on the top of everybody's of everybody's mind of how do we support the industry, which then supports high quality early learning and gets all these other outcomes that we've all known about for years. I would suggest for a lot of you that are interested in this topic, Reg Griffith is here from DeKalb. He brought with him on our resource table some executive summaries and more information about the economic impact study. I really highly suggest that if you have not already taken a look at that, please look at that, because it's a different take on the importance of early learning and what it can do for our state. After school time, where learning continues. As I mentioned before, as we put together the top 10, we try to think about what are the big hot issues that everybody's talking about and the things that will have a big impact. We always, though, there's usually one or two issues that we feel will have a big impact and does have a big impact, but people actually aren't talking about. It's not on the conversation horizon, and we feel that after school time is one of those issues, and so we felt it was important to put it in this issue to really get that conversation going. If you think about a student in their educational lifetime from kindergarten through 12th grade, they spend about 10% of their time actually in a traditional classroom, thinking about, from 8 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, 180 days a year. Traditional school time, only about 10%. The rest of the 90%, they're not in a traditional classroom. So there is a tremendous opportunity for after school time, out of school time, that people are taking advantage of these alternative learning situations and environments. And that we know that not only do you get better academic results, but children who participate in after school and out of school time programs, career exploration, social emotional learning, life skills development, that these have huge impacts on the learning and development of students throughout their careers. And what we need to do, and what we haven't done, is have a conversation about how all these out-of-school time activities, either wraparound services for struggling students or advanced services for kids that want to go into robotics or study STEM, how do those align with what's going on in the classroom, and how do all of those things align with our educational goals for the state? I think it was very telling that for the Governor's Education Reform Commission, they did a broad sweep of things that they wanted to look at to reform education in Georgia and how to get us to the next level. After school time wasn't really mentioned, that was kind of left out. And so this is a huge opportunity in an area that I think we need to pay more attention to. Workforce readiness, the role of K-12. There are clearly many reasons for a high-quality educational public system. One of them is to produce an effective workforce. And traditionally, we've relied, historically, on our institutions of higher education to get everybody trained up, ready to go to work. We have really shifted that in Georgia, and I think across the country, of looking at career and career development and what kind of skills you're going to need coming out of high school to be what we call college and career ready. And Georgia's really done a lot about this, and my assumption is that Superintendent Woods is going to talk more about what K-12 is doing in this area when he's here later today. But in Georgia we start with sort of career exploration in elementary and middle school, and once you get to high school, and the reason I wrote this particular issue was I was confused, frankly, about all the options there now are for kids in high school. They can choose different pathways depending on their interest and where they want to go. There is CTAE, there are career pathways, there are the new laws now with Move On When Ready for dual enrollments, there's IB, there's AP, there's a whole host of options for kids and families to really tailor their interests. And so I tried to provide a sort of clear roadmap to what those options would look like. Issue 9, post-secondary education, access and success. It's no longer good enough just to get kids enrolled in higher ed. They actually need to complete a degree. We're going to look at this issue more in detail in a moment. And the future of education in Georgia. Where are we going? I actually wish I knew the answer to that, but I will pose a lot of questions that we can look at over the next year. And so these last two issues I'm going to go more in depth. But first, as you all, those of you who know me know that I love data. Though I won't do, those of you know Mike Carnathan from ARC, he's got great data slides, but I won't do that to you today. But what I will do, if you look at your book, pages Roman numerals 2 and 3 are II and III. What we try to do is set up each issue and give you a really high-level dashboard to just give a very high-level snapshot of how Georgia's doing relative to the rest of the nation across some key indicators of the birth-to-work pipeline. And so instead of going over 8 different slides, what I tried to do was put it together in an easy-to-read, color-coded chart. And so I was very proud of my chart until I showed it to my colleagues yesterday, and every single one of them go, I don't understand your chart. What are you trying to say? So let me tell you. These are just my sort of subjective color codings. As you all report, you have the numbers there. You can do a much more detailed analysis. But the yellow, and the first 3 in particular, if you look at those trends over time, we're essentially maintaining. We're not getting a whole lot better. We're not getting a whole lot worse. They're sort of cautionary because we're not really moving. Things like low birth weight babies were higher than the national average, but we've stayed higher at the national average at about the same rate over time. That's a bad thing, but we're not really moving anywhere. Early education enrollment, same thing. We're a little higher than the national average, steadily so. That's actually a good thing. Children in poverty. Those of you who've heard me speak before, I always talk about the massive increase of children living in poverty in Georgia. We really did have one, especially over the past decade, but over the past 2 or 3 years, we've pretty much maintained steady. But that steady state is a very bad state to be in. We are, I think, 5th in the nation in terms of overall poverty. We're 9th in the nation in terms of child poverty. And so it's a significant problem, but over the past 2 or 3 years, it's not gotten aggressively worse. So that's why that's yellow. The light greens, which is where the confusion in my office came in from, is that, green, good, go, we're in, the light greens is that we historically are doing well. We're on an upward slope. However, as we know, with a 4th grade reading with NAEP, like the rest of the nation, we kind of leveled off this, we leveled off this year and we didn't see an increase. And so I want to be sort of cautionary about my positive enthusiasm about that. Same things with adults with associate's degree or higher. We are very slowly, incrementally moving up. So that's a good thing, that's why it's green. However, we're not moving up with any kind of robust enthusiasm, which is what we really need to see. So that's why it's not a dark green. And the 2 dark green ones, students earning AP credit and high school graduation rate. This is where Georgia has really excelled over the past couple of years. AP in general, I think, is a story that does not get told enough, that we are very successful in Georgia with our AP students, especially with our low-income and minority students. We're in like the top 10 or the top 12 of the nation in terms of how well our students do on AP. And so that's something that we should be very proud of and we should be crowing about. So this is just to give you a little snapshot of how we're doing. I like to say, we're fair to Midland, which is not good enough, clearly, but we're not the last in the nation. That sometimes gets reported, I think, erroneously, that we're doing okay, but we need to be doing much better. And so I think a lot of these, as we address the issues in the 10, we can really help us get all of these in bright, bright green, dark, bright green. We will be leading the nation. One more thing I want to say about the 10 before I go into the details is, as we all know, the Governor's Education Commission has recommendations coming forward, and so my plan at first was to do an issue specifically about the recommendations, to really put them all together. But as I said before, all of these issues are intertwined, and so should we go back a slide? There are specific recommendations, and we will reference it throughout the report. And specifically, there is stuff in 3 and 4 and early learning that sort of has a chart saying what's going on. But then there were also recommendations like, moving to a competency-based system, flexible assessment schedules, things like that, which impact like 2 and 8 through 10. And so the recommendations are weaved in throughout the entire book. So the first, I want to go into detail on 2 issues, and the rest of the issues will be hit on throughout the day. The first one is post-secondary access and success. This is a chart from page 43 in your book, and I'm not going to drive through the whole thing, but I just use it as a sort of an illustrative example. It used to be, about a decade ago, the focus was on access. We need to get kids graduated from high school and enrolled in post-secondary. And when I talk about post-secondary, I want to be clear, I'm talking about both 2-year and 4-year options. So the technical college system of Georgia, the university system of Georgia, we just need to get them enrolled. Well, the result of that is that graduation rates plummeted in the higher education systems because kids weren't completing. Just getting them there was not enough. We needed to focus on success as well. And so what this issue does is really look at, once kids get enrolled, why are they not completing on any kind of timely schedule or completing at all? And this little map sort of highlights the different barriers in terms of remediation. They're taking all sorts of classes that they may or may not need. They're transferring and losing credits. Funding is always a problem. How do they pay for it? And so this just sort of sets up some of the barriers that students go through when they enter higher ed. So what are we doing in terms of access and success in Georgia? What does that look like? Access, and this is around page 47 of your book, there's two real prongs to access. One, in terms of getting the student ready. So when they graduate high school, they are ready for the rigors of college and career, and that happens, we look at that in the issue 8 right before that. So I'm going to, for today, right now, I'm going to skip right over that part. But another access point that is really a barrier to completion is actually paying for college. Technical or higher ed. And we've seen some pretty alarming trends in Georgia. One, we've had some really high tuition increases. Now, to be fair, relative to other states, Georgia is still, even with these increases, a relatively inexpensive state compared to other states in terms of what we charge for in-state tuition. However, having said that, remember I said we're like the 5th poorest state in the nation? The tuition increases have been dramatic. Since 2008, the technical college system tuition has gone up by about 65%. University system of Georgia has gone up by about 75%. Now we see the tuition increases coupled with a decrease in what HOPE will cover. HOPE is our only statewide scholarship. It is merit-based. And so you see the chart down here where HOPE has been sort of decoupled from tuition, and it's what the funding can afford. So from 2011 to 2016 at a research university for the general HOPE scholarship, it used to cover 90%, and now it's down to about 63%. So you have rising tuition for our only statewide scholarship program, decreasing funds. And so what that has done is we've seen a dramatic increase in student loan debt. Since 2008, there's been an increase in student loans in Georgia by about 47%. Again, we are 9th in the nation for student loan debt. Keep hearing that 9th. We keep hitting top 10s in areas that we don't want to be in the top 10. And so student loan debt is a huge problem, and just paying for higher education is a huge problem. On the other side of that, success. And that is a loaded word, because success, not only success for the student who's entering school and completing a degree, but also success for what Georgia's doing. Georgia has made some tremendous progress over the past couple of years in really helping kids complete a college degree, again, technical or post-secondary, primarily through the work of Complete College Georgia. I've written about that a lot, and a lot of you have covered that a lot over the past couple of years, but it's really a lot of work between the technical college system and the university system, where they have looked at how to reduce time to degree completion. And they've implemented a lot of programs, and they've really worked on their articulation agreements between the two systems, so that when students transfer from a 2 to 4, they don't lose credit, they don't have to retake, and there's a bunch of other programs that Complete College Georgia has done that has really have been successful and that we're looking at. One of the most successful ones, and Georgia State University has really been the poster child for this, is using a data system, what they call the risk assessment strategy. And what they do is freshmen enter Georgia State University based on their background or on their profile. They really identify kids that they think might struggle to complete college. A lot of students, like first-generation college students, students who may be in danger of losing financial aid, all of these things that we know make it difficult to complete, they're able to identify them, provide some wraparound services, and increase support. And you see the results here, and they're pretty dramatic and stunning. In education, we don't see this kind of turnaround this quickly, typically. And so you look at the overall graduation rate for Georgia State University in only 2 years it went up 3 percentage points, which doesn't sound like much, but trust me, that's huge. And when you look at subgroups, African American students up 18% over that time, Latino students 26%, Pell Grant students 12%. These are huge increases. And so through the Complete College Georgia program, they're working on replicating what Georgia State is doing throughout the system. And so I'm very encouraged about where we might go there. So where might we go? Well, you heard me talk about the Hope Scholarship. That's a merit-based program. I personally think we need to look at a need-based scholarship program that is statewide and accessible. Georgia is the only other state other than New Hampshire that does not have a robust statewide just need-based scholarship program. And that's something I think you're going to start hearing a little bit about maybe in the legislative session, especially if the gambling bill comes up. Again, the Work Under Complete College Georgia, STEM initiatives. What are the things that we have in Georgia? We've all heard the thing, we need 250,000 post-secondary graduates by 2020 or 2025. If you look at the number of kids in the K-12 pipeline, there aren't that many. We won't get there if we just rely on high school graduates. We have to look at our adult learners and our adult population. And there are two really great programs I think that we need to keep an eye on. One is Go Back, Move Ahead under Complete College Georgia, where there are a lot of adults out in the community that have some college, some training, something, but they just need to go back and get that last degree or that last class to get them back in, let them get their certificate. Another one that's really exciting is the Accelerating Opportunity Initiative. This one was originally part of a 3-year grant from Jobs for the Future, and the grant ended and the technical college system has supported it for the past 2 years. But again, another problem that Georgia has is in our adult population, we're ninth keeps coming up, in the nation of adult illiteracy. And by illiteracy, I mean like adults that don't read like an 8th grade level. And so for these adults don't have a high school diploma, don't have a GED. The Accelerating Opportunity Initiative, much like sort of the Move On When Ready dual enrollment for high school kids, gets them into the technical college system so they can get their GED and or high school diploma at the same time they're working on an advanced certificate of some sort. And so within, with 12 to 18 months, they can get a couple of degrees to really get them back into the workforce. The 10th issue, future of education in Georgia, where are we going? You heard me mention when I talked about the after-school programming that really only 10% of a kid's time throughout their education lifetime is spent in the classroom. And so Georgia, and I think with the rest of the nation, are really rethinking the delivery of instruction, especially through technology, but all of this personalized learning, this anytime, anywhere, where they can log on and take a class at night or on the weekends or over the summer. Just the delivery of instruction is really changing back from the good old days when we were all in school. And so all of these things are happening very quickly in Georgia. And in some of these areas we're a leader, and in some of these areas we're still learning. And so we wanted to sort of highlight what that looked like. And digital learning is the big one that's driving this with technology. The advantages of the digital learning, students can move at their own pace. They can speed up, they can slow down, they can repeat, they can jump ahead, and it really allows that personalized learning that we keep hearing of. We've seen mixed results. Online courses have shown really fantastic results for certain students. Georgia has 3 fully online charter schools. Those results are not as strong. However, it's unclear as to why. And so I think really as to why the results are not as strong. Is it the type of student that enrolls? Is it the quality instruction? We just don't know yet. And so I think it behooves us all to really look into these virtual charters, online classes, and figure out what does work and how can we replicate that. Technology in the classroom, a lot of blended learning models. Directed Discovery was a great example in Barrow County, where their middle schools were actually taught by classes that were coordinated by Georgia Tech. And they could, connect with science labs in Australia and all kinds of fun stuff going on there. BYOT is bring your own technology. And so any device that a student has can be incorporated into the lessons of the classroom, which brings in questions of access. We have the longitudinal data system in Georgia that details in the book about how to use that, but infrastructure and professional development. Those are the issues that we really need to think about as we move forward with technology. The bring your own technology example, Forsyth County is a leader in the state and probably a leader in the nation in implementing BYOT. And they will say they've had great successes with it, and I think that they have. But they have a lot of challenges as well, especially with the infrastructure. They've had 2 separate bond votes to increase local taxes to help pay for the infrastructure that went through. Yet they are still saying, even today, they don't have enough bandwidth to support everything that they want to do. Forsyth County is a well-resourced county. They're able to put a media and technology specialist in every single school that works directly with the teachers. So you think about a teacher who, maybe like me, I would probably be maybe an English teacher. I don't have a great technology background, but I want to incorporate this because my students are excited about it. So I have 30 kids in my class. 20 of them have an iPad, some of them are on Android, some have a laptop, some have a Kindle Fire. How do I go across platforms to develop a lesson plan? Like, I need support, development, training, all of it. So it's a very labor intensive. So I would caution us as a state as we move forward with technology to be very clear of why we want to do it. Just handing out laptops for every student is not magically going to change learning. So we really need to think about why we want to do it, how do we support it, what are the long-term implications. And then the Education Reform Commission, as we think about competency-based education, flexible testing, all of these things will have a technological component that we need to think about. Can we support, how do we implement, and really be specific about our goals with these things. And I know I talked very fast, so I'm sorry about that, but I had a lot to get through, and Diane's about to pull me off the stage. So do I have time for questions? I have one question, and then I'll be around all day for all of the wonderful follow-up questions you're going to have. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Cheryl Stewart, Southern Education, SWHM. When I look at your top 10 issues, I don't see anything that relates specifically to the special ed population, those students who are currently in school and those who are in that age of 21 to 25 who still can contribute given educational opportunities. Where do they fit into?
That was my 11th issue. We don't address, and that is actually an issue that comes up every year that we're trying to figure out how to, because that's a special population that I think really does deserve, much like the out of school time, after school time, to be lifted up and talked about. Everything, and that's actually a good point. All of this here is really looking at the impact on the broader population of all students in Georgia. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Dana. I know there was a lot of information packed into covering that top 10, but as Dana mentioned, she'll be around throughout the day, so as you think of questions, please just grab her. Next, we have Tomeka Hart, who is Vice President of Programs for the Southern Education Foundation, who's going to be talking with you about equity in education. Tomeka has been a delight to get to know over this last year and a half. She has been an education advocate at the national level, regional level, and even at the local level, starting as a teacher many years ago, but then moving through a number of different education organizations, Teach for America, and she has been a school board member, so she's seen it from all sides. So, Tomeka, we'll give you the stage.
Thank you very much, Diane. And so I am, first, good morning. I'm very honored to be here. So all that Diane talked about, Memphis is my home. So all of that happened in Tennessee. I moved to Georgia, to Atlanta about a year ago to take this role with the Southern Education Foundation. But this is my second tour of duty, if you will. I started my education career here. I taught in Cobb County for 5 years in the 90s. And then went back to Memphis and just recently came back for the Southern Education Foundation. So I've always considered the Metro Atlanta area my second home, with Memphis being certainly my home. I want to thank Dana, Diane, and Steve actually for the invitation to join you here this morning, but also the friendship. It's just I met, probably first organization I met in this role, and they welcomed me into a group of other organizations that are working across the South to make sure that we are doing right by children across several states in the South. And so I show up at a meeting not knowing anybody, and it was within seconds. It was as if I was part of the family, so I appreciate them for that. And then I want to thank Dana for, she has no problem working me. She's worked me already since I've been here, so I want to thank Dana for that. But I was very excited to be invited to talk about these top 10 issues, certainly number 5, the equity issues. I first want to start with a brief introduction of Southern Education Foundation. I hope most of you at least have heard of Southern Education Foundation. I hope you know our work. If not, we're going to make sure you do. We will talk a little bit about the history of education across the South. Just kind of the point is that this is not new, right? We've steeped in these issues. These issues have been with us since the beginning of public education. And then to get into the top 10 issues as presented in the book. The data that I'm going to talk about comes from Southern Education Foundation, the history. We have a new majority series that I'll kind of talk about that gives all the data that I'm going to talk about from our history and the history of public education, and then the data around the equity issues come directly from the top 10. I do want to take a quick moment. You were introduced to Autumn Blanchard, who is our marketing communications director, but we also have Amanda Assalone, who's recording, seems like right now, so I'm about to disturb her, but she's our new postdoc in our higher ed. Amanda, you can stand. I want to thank both of them for joining us, and so she works on our higher ed and our college completion work. So, the Southern Education Foundation. So, who are we? Well, between 1867 and 1907, there were 3 different funds that were founded to tend to the needs of children in the South. Now, these funds were not in the South. The Peabody Education Fund in 1867 was founded in New York. But all of those funds together through that time period, their founding, was so that there was some organization paying attention to the needs of, in 1867, certainly the newly freed black students, and plus the poor white students, recognizing that the South had not established a system of public education to tend to the needs of these students. We were also at that time, through the Slater Fund, looking at supporting the South Black colleges, and we have always been about great teachers. We have always been an organization that's been about how do we make sure that there are qualified teachers teaching these students across the South? How do we make sure that there's a curriculum and instruction that is full of rigor for those students? And so by 1937, all 3 of those funds had combined to become the Southern Education Foundation. The Peabody and Slater funds combined first, and then later the Slater Fund combined with the Jeans Fund and formed the Southern Education Foundation. But we had to open our office in D.C., even though we don't consider D.C. the South, but there was not a Southern state that would allow the Southern Education Foundation to have an integrated staff at that time. So we opened in D.C., but in 1947, we moved our offices to Atlanta, and so we've been headquartered here ever since. Our mission is to advance the equity and excellence in education for all students in the South, paying particular attention to low-income students and students of color. Just a brief history. As I said, this is not new. The South has always had a disproportionately large number of low-income children and gaps in educational access. The South has always had fewer schools, and this was across race lines, but also across socioeconomic background. So we'd see a history of where even white children, poor white students versus wealthy white students, there were huge gaps in how their education was funded and how they performed in education. We start seeing these gaps very early in the 20th century at the foundation of public education. And so economically, I left it off, but I wanted to say, so we saw this period between the 30s and the 60s with New Deal going through the civil rights movement, where we start seeing a decrease in the number of poverty among students across the South, and black and white students. But then in the late 70s and the 80s, we start to see a growth again in the student poverty in education in the South. And it was particularly, in the nation really, but it was particularly concentrated growth of poverty across the South. But since 2005, and so this is where we have a new majority series where we've reported since 2007 how the South and then now the nation has changed. So in 2007, we reported that in 2005, for the first time, the South had the majority of its students in public education were poor students. And then we reported again, we updated that report in 2013 because we found that as of 2010, the South not only had majority poor students in public education, but majority of the students were students of color across the South. And then we just updated in early of last year, about a year ago in 2015, to say now in the nation, the average is about 51%. So not every state has a majority of poor students, but the nation's average is that 51% of the students attending public education in this country are poor students. And just to make matters even worse, when you're talking about income, then there's the wealth gap. And so the start of the recession in 2007, between the recession and 2013, we see a huge gap growth between between white wealth, household wealth, and Black and Hispanic. So when you see this, right now, white household, this is 2013 data, but average net worth of white households is $141,000 compared to Black households of $11,000 and Hispanic households of $13,700. Like that really should bother all of us. And why should we care about these things? Well, the things that Dana just spoke about, but they all are exacerbated by these same issues. And so when you see those kind of gaps, then what is present is what we call an opportunity gap. And the biggest opportunity gap is that lack of social mobility. And social mobility is a real thing. I know it as a first-generation college student, a student who grew up poor in Memphis. I can tell you the difference in my life now with my education and what my parents and even some of my siblings who did not have the same education. It is real, but it's increasingly difficult for poor children to first have more income than their families, even middle class children. But for students living in poverty, it's even harder because they're trying to climb out of generations of poverty, and so it makes it more and more difficult. So when you go back to that network data, we show how difficult this is. And so you have these issues because there are high concentrations of minority population, which often mean they're people who are living in geographic concentrations of poverty and people who have low educational quality of schools. In the metro Atlanta area, the area is ranked 49th of the largest commuter cities in the country for low social mobility. So in this area, it is very difficult for people who are born in poverty, who have experienced poverty for generations, to climb out of that poverty. The disparities in education income, I mean, you know this, I'm not telling you something you don't know. Children from low income, they're just twice as likely to drop out of high school. They have lower access to college attainment and college completion. And so when we know that is also the fastest growing population, we're going to show that in Georgia, then it is everybody's business, and we certainly have to mind these gaps, because if we don't, you're talking about a future where we will not be able to sustain ourselves, because we have a community that a vast majority who have low education, and thus what is that going to say about our economy? So in 2014, the U.S. Department of Education, the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Education released a report looking at the civil rights data of every public school in the country. And these are the components that they were looking at. So looking at equity from, does the school provide access to various educational programming for students? So what school, what is the level of AP that is offered to this school? What is the access to high quality teachers? Are the students given access to ACT and SAT? Are there arts program, gifted programs? Are they focusing on college and career? And then also school climate. So looked at disciplinary expulsion, suspension, contact with juvenile justice, bullying. And what it found in its report was disturbing, that what we know, poor children across the country and children of color face systemic inequity in all areas of these three areas. Now, we're going to pay particular attention to the second one, the teacher and resource equity, because a lot of districts, a lot of states, that's the answer that they're trying to address, not singularly, but certainly. And so in response to the finding, then Arne Duncan Secretary Arne Duncan, former Secretary Arne Duncan now, required that all the states issue an educator equity plan. So every state was required to present, what is your educator equity plan? How are you going to address the issue that you have far too many students who are in high poverty communities, or high poverty and high minority communities, or just high minority communities who have low access to teachers who are experienced, teachers who are high quality, looking at the disparities in salaries across those various schools. And so this, again, the focus was on the educator. So we'll kind of highlight what Georgia's educator equity plan says, but just the significance for Georgia. So as of 2005, the majority of the students in Georgia were poor students in public education, 50% in 2005. Today is 60%. So 60% of Georgia's public students are from low-income communities. Only 5 other states have a higher percentage than Georgia. All of those 5 other states are also southern states. We found also that low-income and Hispanic students are the fastest growing populations in Georgia. So if low-income students and Hispanic students are the fastest growing population, and then you look at the graduation rates, I mean, even the state graduation rate at 78.8%, we have work to do, but the fastest growing populations, our low-income students and our Hispanic students, they have also the lowest graduation rate. Again, that speaks of a future that we can't sustain. We have to do something about this. And it is not just the community that's mostly impacted by this. It is the entire state that has to say, this is a challenge for us and we need to pay attention. So it's exciting to see all of you here interested in this, because without you, the public doesn't know these things. And without you, they're not aware, they're not educated on these things. And so commend you for your attendance and reporting on these things. So Georgia did submit its educator equity plan. It looked at its data, it tried to figure out root causes, and its summary shows that there are a high percentage of inexperienced teachers in high minority and high poverty schools. The teachers in those schools are more likely to be teaching out of field in those schools. So, you know, I'm a arts major, but I'm teaching math. It happens more often in these schools. And there's high teacher and principal turnover. Well, there's high teacher and principal turnover, period, if you look at this Georgia data, but it's specifically higher here. And so I want to be clear, this data there are not that great across the state, but when you're looking at the gaps, right? So there's things that we need to do for all the schools, even schools in our wealthy communities. But when you look at the gap between what's happening in our non-low income and low poverty schools versus the schools that are mostly impacted here, we see a problem. Majority of our high poverty schools are in rural communities. I think we know that, but it's just high time that we pay keen attention to that and just not write that off and say, well, it's just hard to do anything for rural communities. We have got to have the answer to this. And to no surprise to anyone here, the high poverty and high minority schools are concentrated in the metro Atlanta area and Southwest Georgia regions. And so from minding the gaps, what did Georgia decide in order to address those issues? Again, focusing on the educator equity. Georgia's decided that it's going to focus on recruitment and teacher preparation. So how do we increase the rigor and quality of teacher preparation programs? And this is a focus around traditional preparation programs, so whether it's a college of education or alternative certification programs where students are becoming teachers through some other means. And so what I find interesting there is the word recruitment. And so I have a traditional educator degree. I graduated from a college of education from University of Tennessee, so no booing on that. But I was not recruited, though, to be a teacher. No one at the college said, hey, you may be a great teacher. It was a very passive relationship. I just decided that I wanted to be a teacher. And then I signed up to be a teacher. But no one at the college said, hey, student, you know, you may be a great teacher and come and then nurture that in me. States who do this and districts, well, it's a lot of districts who do this, find that they are able to attract higher quality teachers because they are being intentional and deliberate about going out and seeking the talent to come into their districts. So part of teacher prep program, I'm hoping that we'll start seeing that the teacher prep program will start recruiting and not just say, oh, well, you know, there's some great kids over in that College of Engineering and they make some great STEM teachers, let's go get them. And so I would hope to see that. There's the teacher and principal effectiveness focus that the state is going to have, and this is driven by how do you have realistic, transparent, fair, as objective as possible. It's hard to take the human factor out of it, but evaluations of teacher and principals. How do you know and be able to communicate the effectiveness of a teacher, again, in a way that is aligned to the standards that we're to be teaching, aligned to how do we know that this instruction leads to high academic achievement for students. The benefit of teaching and the product of teaching should be learning. How do we align those and how do we track that? And then how do we make sure under the retention and professional growth that we are tending to the needs of our educators? So how are we making sure it's easy for a district to say, well, I'm just going to evaluate all the teachers and then say who's good and who's not, if the district can't look back and say, here are the supports I provided. I know that these supports are effective because I've also measured how I'm doing professional development. I also looked at if my professional development and it goes back to our prep as well, but if my professional development is actually aligned to what teachers need in order to be effective, and am I supporting my teachers, my principals properly? Am I giving them the data that they need? Am I giving it to them timely? Am I giving it to them in a way that it makes sense that they can use this to inform their instruction versus just giving it to them to say, here's your data. So we have to do better about that. And then the factors that impact learning and work environment and the school climate. And often we get caught in the conversation around compensation, but most teachers will tell you the issues that make them leave is school climate issues, right? And so how are we tending to how are we making sure teachers understand classroom management? I have to tell you, again, as a professional with an education degree, it was scary when I walked into class the first day because I couldn't remember. I was like, did I even take a discipline class in the 4 years that I was there? I didn't remember, and there was nothing that was really there to help me. The one thing that I could rely on, though, is I had an excellent trainer for my student teaching experience, and without having her as a mentor, I don't know what I would have done. And then there were other veteran teachers in that building that saw me crying one too many times and said, baby, we don't want you crying every day. So we're going to help you and give you some resources to do this. But how do we tend to the issues? It's real. I dare anybody, if you've never spent time in a classroom, I dare you to do it for more than a day. I dare you to go, and you can understand that it's very challenging issues. And teachers show up every day wanting to get at those issues, but it's tough. And so how do we make sure that communities have the resources that they need? Because often these things are started in the community, the challenges that we see, and they come into the classroom. So how are we tending to that? But how do we also see these issues from a racial equity, social justice lens? And so that we can't have educators that black boys are just getting put out of school at disproportionate rates, for behavior that's disproportionately, they're targeted and they are treated in a way that you don't see white males or girls, African American or white females. And so we have to get at these issues. That's a cultural competency issue that goes back to our prep and to our how do we support teachers. And so these actions are very important, and it's something that we're tending to. So quickly, we just have a few recommendations. One is that this thing has to be community whole, right? We have to have communities that surround schools that are sharing in the vision of that school. So that means we have to be communicating to them what that vision is. We have to have collaborative action. So it does take, the media plays an important role, to be reporting on what's happening, to hold the leadership accountable, but to also make sure that communities understand the information, and community organizations like mine, nonprofit organizations, to partner with the education system. We need to enhance our leadership programs for our teachers. We know that teachers want to be leaders, and it's a shame that right now the only way for a teacher to get in many states to get some kind of promotion is to become a principal. And if I don't want to be a principal, what does that mean? They should not have to leave the classroom to see growth in their career. And finally, last two, we should be incentivizing teachers to remain in our most challenged schools, and we can talk about that later, and look at our funding and making sure that it's equitable and that we are distributing our resources in an equitable fashion. So I thank you. I think that leaves us time for Q&A. Okay. So I'll hush. All right, yes.
You're saying incentivize teachers to remain in challenging schools. But you said that school climate is the reason most people give up education.
Yes.
So what incentive are you talking about that would address school climate?
So I love that, because you heard incentive as money, and I don't think it's just money. Incentivizing also means back to that principal effectiveness. So usually that is driven by the leader in that building often. And so every teacher that I've talked to who have stayed for several years, their answer is the same. They felt nurtured in their career by their leader. They felt part of the team, and they felt that their school, that they all had a common vision. And so I will venture to say that I will say that money is an issue. I won't gloss over that funding is an issue. Teachers, I think, are paid in many communities very low. And so for the pay and then the work that happens without those other climate issues being dealt with, it's difficult to see someone staying. But so I think it's also the career ladders that I just talked about. So often if I'm a teacher, I don't have anywhere else to go but in the classroom, but there's no way for me to have higher skills. One thing that we did, and as an incentive, I'll show you in Tennessee, in Memphis for certain, is that we tried to implement, they're still working on it, but a career ladder. So if you come in as a novice teacher, you have these 5 years to learn what you need. We were increasing the salary, trying to have that salary baseline at $50,000, but you can then be promoted to a professional teacher. You don't have to come out of the classroom, but your salary increases to $75,000, but you take on a few more responsibilities, up to then becoming a master's teacher, which we had put at just above $100,000. You stay in the classroom. You don't have to come out of the classroom, but you have fewer classes, but you are mentoring other teachers. And so in that way, I don't want to be a principal. I want to be a teacher, but I don't see some pathway out. So those kinds of things where it's not just about the salary, but it's about growth. It's about responsibility for the teacher. And then it's those school climate issues. Yes.
Think about the achievement gap now. You're getting this research out of Stanford that's pretty startling about the difference now that the black-white achievement gap is not anywhere near as great as the rich-poor achievement gap. And, Dr. Reardon's research suggests that very wealthy parents are producing super students. And in fact, low-income students are doing better than they were doing 50 years ago, but these super students are far and beyond even middle-class kids due to the investment, time, money, and energy that these kids are getting. I think it's a very difficult gap to close because, you've got these kids who were 3 years old at Johns Hopkins math camps. And his research is all about these parents have an unprecedented amount of money and energy in these little kids. And how do we deal with that? Because what parents can afford to put into their kids is very hard to, I think, somehow counterbalance what the schools can do.
So one of the things I think it's being realistic about what it takes, right? And so if we're going to have that as a comparator, right, then when people say, oh, it's not about money, I was like, oh, really? Really, because money in and of itself, but money buys resources, right? Money buys that time and attention. But it's something that Dana talked about, the out-of-school learning time that we don't spend a lot of time talking about. And so in addition to when I served on the school board in Memphis, I also was the CEO of the Memphis Urban League. We try to put a lot of time into children, right, to do that, to counter all of that, right? So we took children to college campuses who had never even left their neighborhood in Memphis, like seriously, and took them out of town and had them spend the night out of town and understand what these things are so that to open up a world to them and at least try to counter when they leave the school, without a quality out-of-school learning time, there's not a whole lot happening for them for that. We may not be able to close the gap between, because that other gap that has to close is that 141,000 versus 11,000, right? So you're exactly right. But we have to think, what is the role of school? What are we willing to do? And are we really, we talk about funding. I don't think we've ever had a real comprehensive conversation about, are we really funding education publicly at the level that we need to? And I don't think that we are, but I don't think it's just as simple as saying give it more money. It's what are the experiences students need in and out of school, and how do we make sure we are countering that and acknowledge that when you look at per pupil, when you're looking at the per pupil for a poor kid, that usually is what he's getting or she getting, right? When you look at the per pupil for a kid in a wealthy school, they're getting that public per pupil, but they're getting all that other stuff that you talked about too. And so it's not that the kids in wealthy Fulton or wealthy side of Atlanta are getting the same amount as the kids in the poor side of Atlanta. It's not true. And so until we address that and be honest about it, we will not be able to address the gaps. But publicly, we have to have that conversation and say, what is the public's role in this? And if we tend to these, because we just showed you that we can't afford not to, because eventually the world is going to be different. In Georgia right now, again, you got 60% of the kids are poor. Well, that's going to keep growing because the percent of kids who are higher income is dropping. Percent of kids who are white is dropping. It dropped 8% over the last 10 years. Like 43% of the students are white. So some of that is also income. We can't just keep putting our head in the sand and acting like that's someone else's problem.
Tameka, why don't we take one
Okay.
question from this side,
Okay.
and then we'll wrap it up.
Yes.
You know, I've covered Fulton County Board of Ed for 20 years, and this conversation comes up every year, and I've covered it for 20 years. And to me, there's a third rail here that no one seems to want to talk about, is the family component in schools. Is that we put so much that the schools have to fix, but yet there's nothing on there that says the family part, which I think something charter schools does is require that. And just wonder why you don't have more. You talked about it, you addressed a little bit, but the emphasis also on life outside the classroom and how that carries into the.
So actually, no, we have 8 principals, and one of our principals is deep parent and community school ties. And so I can tell you that it is easier for a school that is an option to require parent. So school board member for 9 years, I've seen the difference in how a charter school in their contract and then can tell parents, if you don't do this, you got to leave. We can't send them anywhere. So the incentives is different when you're talking about public school, but there are some who are doing phenomenal work, right? So we also we had a school that just tried to do a parent contract, right? So it's a traditional public school that did a parent contract to say, you will commit to doing X amount of hours in a very poor community. And the parent participation went up 75%. So it's a leadership thing. Again, it's something that we should be training leaders and teachers to say, actually, people will rise to the expectation that you set for them. And so often we come with low expectations of communities, not believing that they can or not believing that they will, but people will rise to that expectation. And so it's an issue of leadership, it's an issue of will. And I do know that parents care. Again, I grew up with poor parents, but my mom, who was a maid, she was at everything that the school asked her to be at, but someone asked her to be there. And so we just need to have that kind of direct intention around it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tameka. Please join me in thanking Tameka for her presentation as well. We've got a lot of challenges ahead of us in hearing about the top 10 issues, and then certainly the gaps that we continue to focus on. For the full 22 years of the partnership, we've been talking about those gaps and how we need to go about closing them, so we can't give it up. We've got to continue working on it.